Welcome to the Data Engineering Show. We are here again, this time, different setup. Eldad and I are not next to each other at the office. We're actually at home. With us,
I have my
at his
own
home,
mic, which is
at at South
not
Tahoe,
muted.
at Tahoe Lake, is Max Beauchemin. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah, as good as it comes, except for people who actually speak French as their first language. But yeah, you did well. And yeah, I am in beautiful South Lake Tahoe, so not too far from the lake and somewhere surrounded by mountains. It's beautiful out here.
Awesome.
Usually people who live in those amazing places, they're polite and they put the background, like live background, to see how amazing the place is. And then I guess you are kind of enjoying the view yourself. So thank you for that.
I could go 180, and then you might be able to see glimpses of the lake in the background and a lot of pine trees. But yeah, I'm saving that view for myself here.
I cheated, by the way, with pronouncing your last name correctly. You know what I did? I used the amazing LinkedIn feature where you can click to listen to the pronunciation of your name. So that's how I heard you pronounce it yourself.
Oh, nice. So I recorded that at some point, I guess.
Probably forgot about that feature, but it comes in handy sometimes.
Yeah, I never knew it exists.
Yeah. So if you go to Max's LinkedIn page, next to his name, you see like this audio button. You click it and you hear Max pronounce his own name.
Nice. We'll share links after the podcast.
That's a pretty cool feature. Now, no one has excuses in mispronouncing my name.
I won't record myself. I like to see the struggle, the first attempt.
When you put the signature, your LinkedIn signature, kind of put an action in the link that takes you straight to the play of your name, and that's kind of like the page opens up, and you get LinkedIn telling your name, pronouncing your name properly. That's
always
exactly how
more innovation. Amazing.
Tons of innovation.
Yeah, I really don't mind it. Like people mispronounce my name, I just go by Max. They just call me Max, and I don't mind it very much.
So Max is quite the data guru. If you haven't heard about Max, so Max has actually started Apache Airflow back in 2014 when he was at Airbnb. Shortly after, in 2015, he started Apache Superset. Later on, he moved on to found Preset, the commercial version of Superset. And going backwards in time, before AMB, he spent time at Lyft, at Facebook. So he's an amazing data professional. And, the rule for the data engineering show is, if you've listened so far, we bring in data practitioners, not vendors, nobody to sell anything they're building. So Max, even though he is the founder and CEO of Preset, we'll actually talk about Max as the data practitioner and
the boring part of
cars
Max
from the data world and less about what he's selling in the world out there.
It's interesting. Well, over time, so I started the company a little bit more than 3 years ago. And, I was coding a whole bunch at the beginning. I was wearing all the different hats. Then I stopped coding very much, in the past year or two, but I still do a lot of data engineering. So I'm still in the data pipeline, still building dashboards, still analyzing our data. So I'm holding on to that data analyst and analyst engineer type role as maybe 10% of my time. But I don't code. I don't develop as much anymore. I don't contribute as much to Airflow and Superset as I used to, just because it requires a lot of context.
Boys, did you offer your friends something to eat?
It's remote, Mom. They're not physically with us.
Did you talk about Fireball?
The podcast is not about Fireball, Mom.
Did you tell your friend it's the fastest cloud data warehouse?
Mom, we're in the middle. Please close the door. We'll talk later. Yeah, it seems the listeners quite surely understand that Max has a problem with delegating. He is a CEO who cannot let go of his passion for data engineering, still hands-on coding until this very day. Okay, cool. So let's get started. Before we go into actually, Preset, and it's super interesting to hear how you've built sort of a modern data stack there when you started the company. Let's go back actually to your time maybe at Airbnb. Tell us a little bit how you got there, sort of how you got into data throughout your career, and sort of the role you landed at Facebook and then in Airbnb, and we'll touch on the projects you did there.
Yeah, so I started my career as what you would call today a data engineer, but I was a data warehouse architect. Or I did a little bit of web development. Then I became the data warehouse architect / business intelligence engineer. So I had a good run, almost a decade worth of like using the previous generation tools. So things like business objects, Informatica, a lot of ELT back then too. I would just write a lot of store procedures, either in SQL Server or Oracle. Right. So writing a lot of ETL, building a lot of dashboards, organizing the data for the whole organization. At that time it was Ubisoft. So I did that at Ubisoft video game company. It was super fun. You got my foundation in data. So tons of data pipelines, data modeling, dashboard building, that sort of things. And then I joined Facebook in 2011, I believe, 2011, 2012. And then so I skipped Yahoo. So I went to Yahoo. It was the birth of Hadoop. I didn't stay there very long, maybe 2 years or so. But I remember meetings with the people who went on to start Cloudera. So my manager's manager was Amir Awadallah there. And then some of the
It was always there in every, impactful, bigger than this world event in data evolution. It was there somewhere, somewhere in the background, in the foreground. It's always see the picture, always see Max there. 2 years in Yahoo, exactly at the right time. And then, go on.
I was at the right time. And then I joined Facebook, which, I think so that was a few years later. So I was in Yahoo like 2008, then joined Facebook 2011 or 12. And then there was like a big renaissance of, data tools there. So people had to rebuild a lot of things from scratch on top of Hadoop and other things, right? Because the scale of Facebook was just too big for the Teradatas of the world, or like there's just no commercial database that could scale to petabytes at the time. And I think like during my time,
I loved it.
Yeah. So
like having those big tech companies, there's no database company in the world that can build something that is big enough for us. And we just have smart people, so let them do it. And I always wanted to ask, and since you did it so many times, so successfully, kind of incubating something in big tech, in a big company, how was it back then? How is it today? Is it still happening today? Or do people just live and open a startup? What's your take?
Yeah, there's got to be like phases of like new Renaissance kind of era. But I know at that time we had to rebuild everything on top of Hadoop, right? Like it was just like rebuild everything on top of MapReduce. And it was not better databases. Like you look at Oracle's very advanced database, or Teradata is actually like a really good database. It just wouldn't be like parallelism and scaling horizontally was just not as much of a premise as it needed to be for a company like Facebook. So Facebook had to, rebuild everything on top of MapReduce, or rebuild everything with the premise of things having to scale to thousands of machines horizontally. So that created like this culture of like, hey, we're building everything from scratch. Did a lot of experiments too. So we had a bunch of different data pipeline tools. One of which is called Data Swarm, became the inspiration for Airflow, along with other ones. But there was like probably for every project that stayed at Facebook and got used by people, there's probably like a dozen other projects that didn't go anywhere. So they probably had, there's probably been like 20, 30 different schedulers built at Facebook, and then one or
so
two.
many dead startups, so many startups that could have happened and didn't happen because just Facebook is, let's have 50 projects on data pipelines and one of them will win. And that's you again, by accident. Again, you're there in that single project again. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, I was there at that time, when these things were happening. And like, interestingly, I don't know if it's the engine, or if it's like kind of, if you think about it, are the big tech companies like stopping innovation by like, putting the brains kind of inside their walled gardens, or are they like actually stimulating progress with like all the wealth that they generate? So I think it's a mix of the two. But in the case of Facebook, there's a lot of like really good, I think open source helps to break the wall gardens of tech, right? Because people like me are like, I'm going to join Airbnb if I can work on open source. And then the stage for impact is not Airbnb, is the world. There's been a lot of people before me too that have had a lot of success with open source. So just kind of following those footsteps and say, hey, maybe I'm delusional enough to think that I can do the same as people like Jay Krebs, or people like the people behind Hadoop and some of the open source technology, or just like Linus Torvald, I think has been an inspiration to us all too. So, I was like, oh, maybe I'm crazy enough to attempt this thing, and other people have done it. How hard can it be?
When you joined Airbnb, how did the variety of data teams look like?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. So I really grew while I was there. So it's hard for me to close my eyes and think like what exactly it looked like on my first day. But I remember, there was like a handful of people, about 3 people, Jonathan Parks, Aaron Keys, Sid. I think all 3 were working on something called core data. So that was like people at Airbnb had suffered enough from, handling raw data. And they're like, we need to do some data engineering. We need to create some core data sets that we can trust and rely on. Later on, these data sets, like there's just too much kind of pressure and too much pull from the different teams to try to evolve these things centrally. But for a while, like people working on core data, we started using early Airflow in production, like within a few months, to build the core data stuff and some of the core data sets at Airbnb. And soon after, we migrated a lot of the pipelines that existed in some previous scheduler called Kronos that was built on top of Mesos. At the time, so there was like 3 data engineers. They didn't call themselves data engineer. It was not like a popular term at the time. I think they called themselves Etlians, ETLENs, a little bit like aliens, like some sort of, so that was the name of the team. And then there was probably, data platform was maybe
the data mart team. Back then, there's formal names.
Yeah, a little fun name. And then we had soon after, so there was like maybe 10 data scientists, 10 people in data platform. And then the team went on to become like, I think there's like 100 data scientists by the time I left. And there's just an army of data scientists. The data engineering was probably like 15, 20 people.
And that was sort of between 2014, 2017, right?
Yeah. So data platform, including all the data functions, was definitely like north of like 150 people or so.
And so tell us about sort of the context in which, and sort of the role and how it went about with Airflow during those years.
So I started a project in between gigs. So I left Facebook with the premise that I was going to work on something like Airflow, at least as a side project. I didn't know the name at the time. I talked with people at Airbnb and they're like, we need something. We need like something to manage our DAGs. We have tons. We're crumbling under the weight of our own pipelines. So we need something better than what we have today. So I was like, oh, that sounds fun. I want to come and work on this. And then in between jobs, I started working on what now became Airflow. So I had, I think, a 2 weeks sprint. So instead of like, taking vacation, I just decided to start coding this thing, and I put it under my personal GitHub. So I would join and say like, hey, it's already open source. Like, what you going to do about it? So it was under my personal GitHub. And then the moment I got there, I think we got something in production very, very quickly. So it was like within like a month or 2 of me being there, we had some data marts in production very quickly. And within like 3 to 4 months, I think we had all the core data pipelines, and we migrated a lot of the legacy pipeline to Airflow. We also moved the experimentation framework as a gigantic DAG of thousands of tasks, to compute all the metrics and all the experiment data. So there was a big hunger internally. There's a lot of like data professionals and people who needed to schedule arbitrary workloads. It was also at a time where like things like dbt did not exist. So Airflow was preferred for SQL, like for scheduling mountains of SQL too. And then there's a bunch of like, people doing all sorts of crazy stuff with, R and IPython and notebooks and Java or whatever it might be. So there was really a need to schedule thousands and thousands of jobs. Big hunger for that. So that's how it took off.
And when sort of did you notice that, hey, this is being picked up? It's extending its reach beyond this project of mine and gaining popularity?
Externally, right? So I think internally, I cannot like understate like how much I visited or I did some evangelism around Airflow. To say super early, I would visit any company in the Valley that would show interest of me coming and talking to them, I would just go and visit them and answer their question, talk about their data engineering challenges, and kind of convince them that Airflow was probably a good solution to that stuff. And the landscape at the time was oozy.
That's how you do it, baby.
Yeah, that's
you go
it.
out there and knock on doors, and you just do it old school.
Yeah, and all I wanted, I never wanted to start a company, or that was not my intention at all. I just wanted to build something relevant and impactful, right? So when the VC started approaching me to say like, "Hey, why don't you start a company?" It's like, "Are you crazy? Like that's like, why would I do that?" And I'm not an MBA. Like I'm happy. I used to call it like doing open source for the right reasons. Like I'm just here to like evangelize and build something useful. For the longest time, that was really what was driving me. And then it was really progressive, right? It's like the popularity comes like one issue, one PR at a time on GitHub. You're like, oh, here's someone that seems to be associated with, this company name, right? And then the mailing list, so it's very progressive. So it goes from, a handful of people showing a little bit of interest to, a small crowd. And eventually it's like a mob. And now I heard recently there's, I think Astronomer did some analysis, and there's probably north of like 100,000 companies using Airflow today.
Wow.
It's just insane.
Insane. From Max refusing to start a company.
Shut it down now. Shut it down.
You can't. It has a life of its own. So people ask me like, when do you know that your open source product is very successful? When if you would try to stop it, you couldn't, right? Like if I would try with all my might and all the resources in the world that I have to stop Airflow, I could not at this point. That's when it's successful.
It's like the Terminator. Once the machines take over, you can
AI all over again.
and then you also started Superset.
Yeah. So the genesis kind of story for Superset. Well, first, there's like the delusion of like, I can build a BI tool. I think that came from Facebook, because at Facebook, people had built all sorts of little visualization tools that were, very simple to use, very fast time to chart and time to dashboard.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a data set ready, you can build a chart and dashboard off of that data set in no time.
One of our engineers joined us from Facebook, maybe 4 to 6 months ago. And one of the first things he mentioned was how nice and how well kind of data visualization and data consensus is at Facebook. You send the link, it opens up a page with all the right charts. There's a discussion on the data. So just now you mentioning kind of took me back to that conversation, and was this kind of query history and all the discussions we're having on how to embed data within conversations. So yeah, it's super interesting. And sorry.
Yeah, no, totally. I think it's great, like to talk, and I hate to like overpraise, any big like tech giant or whatever, but like we gotta, credit is due where it's due. I think like a lot of what we call today the modern data stack, there was like a microcosm of all the innovation in the modern data stack, like happened way before, like 10 years before at Facebook, right? They had like something like a iData, which is a data portal, data catalog with the full lineage of everything at Facebook. You can navigate the metadata graph of all the data object pretty well, do like lineage analysis and impact analysis. There's all sorts of like little visualization tool, little schedulers, and then the database is like a database called Scuba. That's a little bit like Druid and Firebolt maybe too in some ways, right? Like a really fast real time in memory.
They have a really strong team, by the way, writing a vectorized query engine, really strong.
The Presto team too, right?
Super respectful.
Yeah. Very impressed by the quality of the gray matter at Facebook, right? Like people are empowered to build new things. So things like Scuba, things like HiPal was like a SQL, a little bit of a SQL notebook type thing. There's something called Unidash. That's a dashboard building tool that came a little bit after my time. And just this culture of like, if it doesn't exist, I'm going to build it, right? So I think there's like...
now they migrate everything to the Meta Cloud.
So that I don't know about, but yeah. The Meta Cloud, I guess, is the new, their data centers. I don't know.
So all of your friends at Facebook, everyone was sitting there in the room, and everybody did someone had. It became this huge open source success beyond control. So you had to feel special. So you went on and said,
I'll do it. I'll do it from Airbnb. I don't know. I looked to open source on the Facebook stuff internally. It was just difficult because everything was tangled up. Like, in data, all the different systems are like, it takes a fair amount of duct tape and chicken wire to kind of hook a data platform together. And it is really hard after the fact to take a piece of that data platform that's all duct tape and chicken wire, the rest of everything, and cut that out to serve it as an open source project. So I think it's been done in the past of like refactoring an internal technology as an open source project. Some companies have done it with some projects, but I'm guessing it's always with the premise that it might be open source one day. So let's keep it, let's keep this as a microservice that, works well by itself. But yeah, I realize
if all the engineers leave us, we can solve it by open sourcing it and kind of getting engineering love back.
All sorts Max to evangelize it.
That happened in the past, like that premise of like, if we open source this, like the community is going to build it, so that I think like in my experience is not like as if you guys are like, hey, we're just going to open source Firebolt so that we get, hundreds of contributors for free. That typically does not work, right? It needs to be open source from the get-go. And I think you really it's really often is like a handful of core contributors that are bred, that are very close to the core of the project that built the bulk of it.
Now, you started Preset in 2019?
Yeah, early 2019.
Early 2019. Okay, so here's the.
So what happened?
Yeah, what happened?
So what changed? Well, so it had been like my life's goal pretty much to push Superset forward so since 2015. So it had been like 4 years that I've been working on this thing. I was like, I want open source to come and compete in business intelligence, data visualization. Right? That was like my life goal. I was like, I want to build something relevant that's in every other company, so that every tech company, every company who does data. So I'd been sponsored or, incubating my project inside Airbnb and inside the Lyft for a little while. And these companies are super nice. And, I had a small team of people working with me on these things, pushing this thing forward. But when I started talking with investors, they were telling me that, or it became really clear to me that it would be a really great way to take on capital to really be able to push the open source project forward. So really, it's in the vein of like, if I raise my A round was 12.5 million, so that allowed me to like hire a bunch of people that are very dedicated to working on Superset and making Superset great. So there's always this duality too of like, hey, you need to build an open core, you need to build some crust, you need to build a successful company that makes money too. But I've seen other companies do it successfully, like companies like Databricks, Confluent, and different companies of different shapes and sizes. So I thought I could navigate as well as anyone else, how to give back to the community to grow an open core, but also like build something that we can sell in and around it.
So let's get back to Max the practitioner for a second. So you're starting a company and obviously you're super experienced with data. Walk us through how you thought about building an organization that's sort of data-driven from the ground up and how we went about that.
Yeah. So at first, it's like when you don't have a product out too. I mean, building a company, there's just like a 6 months or a year of just like thrash, right? There's just like, you need to like set up a bunch of stuff, make a few hires, just kind of get going. And there's not a whole lot of data at that point in time. But, one thing I've been talking about lately is this idea of like data native companies, the same way that there's like cloud native companies or digital native companies that were born in a certain era, act in different ways. And I think like this generation of companies like Preset, we add just like really easy access to things like BigQuery and Snowflake, to things like, dbt and Airflow. Like we didn't have to build our own, scheduler. We could just like pick one up. So you assemble your data platform, Fivetran, or now I know there's like open source counterparts like, Airbyte and Meltano. So for us, we just like sign up for Fivetran. We get our HubSpot data and our segment data, kind of all centralized in a data warehouse pretty easily. Like you can kind of pick up these pieces off the shelves, and they're all like pay as you go. So they're really cheap or free if you don't have a lot of data. That's how they get you though. But that's how say Preset, we offer a freemium or up to 5 seats at Preset. That's a really good offering. So if you're a small startup, you can try the tool, make sure it works. Right. And then it's like pay as you go.
Is it free, full, like featured, like any big limitation, or really kind of about 5?
It's like 90% of the features are in. I think we block some things like alerts and reports, so where alerts are delivered.
LDAP and stuff like that. If you have 5 people and you need that, go away. That's exactly.
But if you're 5 people too, so then the premium tier. So there's freemium, and then the premium is like $20 per user per month. So if you have 5 users, it's like $100 a month, right? And then you can have the SSO and LDAP on that tier too. And we have an enterprise tier too. But what's nice with these tools is you can sign up for them in 10 minutes, and you can, so you can start like sending data into BigQuery, and the bill is going to be like nothing, right? Like, so you can assemble a data platform for us. We picked up Fivetran, Segment, DBT, BigQuery, and just started pushing a bunch of data into BigQuery and started to like reorganizing the data with DBT. We have Airflow now too. It took a little bit longer for us to really need an orchestrator, but like as you assemble more things, so we have things like High Touch now too, which is a reverse ETL tool to send data back to your, maybe like product usage data back to your CRM systems. So now that we have a complex enough data platform, we need something like Airflow, but it took a little bit longer for us to to really have a need for that. But super easy. Picked up Astronomer, just like it's installed, in a half a day, and you can start jamming on that stuff very, very quickly.
It's scary and crazy how fast you can play with those building blocks today.
Yeah.
And how hard and painful and long it was just a few years ago, which is crazy. If you're not long enough in our space, you don't appreciate. You said as new companies get born, they get born differently. Like, and we're getting old, right? As we found companies, but your engineers, your people, they are fresh, and they are coming with a new mindset, and it's just it's crazy. So it's a lot of ecosystem play.
It's late to, if you compare say cloud native companies like Airbnb that were born, say like 2000. Airbnb is a little early for that, but companies born after like 2010 or so are all built on AWS, right? Like, and that is also like hard to appreciate just how hard we used to order servers and machines, and we had to wait for the boxes to make it to the data center that we were renting, and we had to wait for the sysadmin there, usually balding with a ponytail, to install that server somewhere.
I missed that. One of my best friends from my previous startup for Sisense, Shlomi. Hi, Shlomi, if you see us and listen to us. We love him so much, and he used to do it old school. He used to fly to New Jersey, and he used to install stuff there and sit there in the basement and everything. Now he's running AWS on the AWS. So it's not the same anymore, but in a good way.
People would make like nice setup for the network wires, like to kind of weave them together in a specific way and use zip ties of different colors that meant different things. Yeah. But so it starts. So that was a super transformational. Companies who were born after EC2 was born, or EC2 and S3 as like core components of AWS completely changed the game. You just be like, hey, I need 100 machines, and you get them. But then I think on the data space, it took longer for us to just be like, I need a data warehouse, and I need a scheduler, and I need a data visualization tool. And you don't need to talk to salespeople. You don't need to it's not expensive too. You would think it'd be like, oh, you want a data viz tool? That'd be $50K. Now it's like $20 per user per month. Like, why? Like, just set it up. You can use it today, And I think that's transformative. Like today, and you don't even need to talk to someone, right?
You can, though, if you want, you can, and that's when it gets. And then that's when you raise money, because again, 5 people. It's an amazing team, but it grows. And from my experience, everyone needs that at one point or another. Everyone in the company, almost everyone in the company needs that. And as companies get younger, more people need that. So it's amazing to see. I've been in the space and Buzz as well for so many years, and it's just amazing to see that, the need for data nobody gets
stops.
tired of that. Nobody gets tired.
Yeah,
it's so creative.
Here's a question though. It's like, why is like data like 5 to 10 years behind some of the software engineering practices, or like data engineering is like notably behind, I think, where software, because it's expensive. Yeah, it's not a priority too. And we've had tools for a long time that were kind of okay, right? So maybe for a long time you had, I don't know, Business Objects or Cognos, and you had like Informatica and Teradata. That was your stack, and it was okay, right? And maybe that prevented the kind of innovation that we see today. Maybe, and the data team used to be just like a handful of specialized people. Like 2000 to 2010 for me, it was like, hey, we had like 4 or 5 data specialists at Ubisoft, and we were taking care of all the data needs of the company. And that was okay back then.
You needed IT back then. That's why. And now you don't need IT anymore. That's the only difference.
But every day that goes by, data engineering and software engineering are getting closer together in sort of bi-directional ways. You see, I always say, like, a decade ago, software engineer tasked to do a data project or do something with a database would say, that's not for me, that's a job for a student, and look down on those tasks. And today you see that, more and more software engineers wanting to do data related projects and tasks. So much of the more interesting stuff is happening there. And you see also the way data engineers work is sort of, so deeply affected by what's happening in the software engineering world. And it's just, that's the direction everything's headed.
And Mel brought and data science kind of brought a lot of excitement to data too. So being able to train models and to predict at scale, I think, is something that brought a lot of attention to data and data engineering. Right? If you want to have the algorithms, you want to have some good like ranking, like feed ranking, and you want to have like run a lot of A/B tests to know what to ship in your product. You need to have good data. So I guess like that pushed more requirements on like being data driven.
Yeah. So back to Preset. So how many people are in the company these days?
So we're about like 70 people or so.
70. And how many people, are in charge or sort of are on top of that data stack?
So we have 2 data specialists now, but those are new folks that started less than 6 months ago. So they've been, so we have an analyst engineer / data analyst and a data engineer now, but it took quite a while for us.
And Max.
I do spend a fair amount of time doing some.
Nobody wants to join that team.
I don't know. There's definitely like pros and cons of joining a team with, I guess, super experienced data engineer. Like I'm like kind of anal and picky about like certain things, but at the same time, like I can be a good peer, good mentor on some things. So we're like 2.5 people or so on the data team itself. I think get this right. What you said before, like building a company, you don't realize just like all the functions that are required. As a tech founder, at first you're like, hey, I can do a little bit of everything, and it's mostly about building a product that sells itself, right? And then you realize like, oh shit, no, I need a sales team, I need SDRs, I need like customer success folks that can help my customers be successful in my product. We need education. There's the whole marketing side I'm not even going to talk about because there's a lot of specialty there. There's a lot of data-driven processes there too. So it's hard to understand, I think, as a tech founder, like what really you're getting into and the vastness of the skills that are required to build a successful company.
So, for other companies that are maybe now in the process of, building a data stack from scratch or modernizing, we enjoyed talking about how fun it is nowadays with all these building blocks, but still, sort of what lessons learned in implementing a modern data stack can you share? I mean, if you had to do the same thing all over now, what would you have done a little bit differently?
Faster, just faster.
I think we
3 years.
About the
3
same
years,
thing.
everything.
I think like the recipe that we chose like works very well for us. So Fivetran works very well to do data sync, right? So you as a startup, like we're a small startup, we have more SaaS systems than we have employees. So we have more than 100 SaaS services that we use, which is kind of insane, right? Like there's a whole portfolio of things that you want to use. And there's some really core ones. Your CRM is really important. So we use HubSpot. We'd probably pick HubSpot again. And then Fivetran to bring the data from the different systems, into and land it into a warehouse. So that's a really easy data acquisition thing. Then we built our own. We had to build our own like scraping and call it like analytics events pipeline. So you're inside your product. I'm sure inside your database you have a lot of sensors and you have a lot of like logging. Every time someone runs a query, every time someone does an action for us, it's like anytime someone creates a chart, saves a dashboard, alters a dashboard, invites someone, all these analytics events we need to bring to the warehouse. So we use Segment as a little bit of an ingestion layer for that. So we send our event to Segment.
Obsessed with observability?
Yeah, well, so I am more to me, there's like operational reporting on one side, and that's just Datadog for us. So that's more like technical, like how are the systems and machines doing? And then there's like the analytics stack, which is kind of interesting because they're two different worlds, and maybe they don't need to be. And I think they're less different worlds than they used to be in the past, right? Like I'm sure at Firebolt, you probably have use cases across the chasm of like operational analytics and more like traditional business analytics. But for me, I'm much more on the product analytics side of things.
We are very flexible with we let employees use whatever tool they want as long as it's Firebolt. And if they're not happy, if they don't like using Firebolt, it's okay. It's also okay, of course. Then they have a Kafka stream and they should just manage on their own. I've heard Honeycomb by many people. I think there's a great project going on. I think we on our end, we use observability now mostly to define success, enable engineers, have them figure out how to kind of define the success of a feature they're releasing with observability. So it kind of focuses them and removes a lot of noise on let's just go crazy on matrices and events and just choke the system. And then so kind of we went through that journey. How is it with your startup? Where are you now on the observability evolution?
On the observability side of the house, so there's a pretty big chasm between what we do for call it like business analytics or product analytics for us. So this is all like for us, it's BigQuery, dbt Fivetran, preset to analyze this data. On the observability front, we take advantage of everything that Datadog offers, like from their traditional logging to metrics logging. They have like some sort of time series database behind the scene. And this is a world that I know a little bit less about. But yeah, Datadog's got also APM, like application performance monitoring.
Oh, that's when you get into that. Don't go there.
Yeah,
so when you go into APM, it gets expensive.
Yeah. So we use that stack for observability, and then we use a different stack for business analytics. And then that's much more the place that I come from. The lines are getting blurred. Database like Firebolt, I think now can take either workload. Like you don't need a time series database for your observability and a different database for your data warehouse as much anymore. I don't know how you guys position yourself in relation.
So when we get consistency is key to getting that done properly. And if, we can spend a whole podcast on why consistency is so hard on low latency databases, but why it's so needed. But yeah, we use also multiple systems, so not just Firebolt, obviously. And we've went through multiple different products, and we just realized that, sometimes different tools solve the same problem for different people in a better way. And that's also okay. But we do kind of try to manage cost. Kind of adding those tools adds up, and to get this kind of at one point overlapping feature sets, and you get confused, like 5 logging systems. So we're also kind of trying to do a diet, and once in a while stop for a second and say, okay, we've been trying things out. Let's stop for a second and just pick 1 or 2 winners. I don't see the fact that you can connect stuff so fast today. It only gets simpler. Makes that
creates the reverse problem, right? If I can spin up both Firebolt, Imply, Pinot, and 3 other databases today, then maybe I'll start using all of them, and then you have this accumulation of system, right? I talked about that in my Airflow Summit talk about like kind of setting up our data platform at our small startup. And yeah, it's so easy to set up systems that maybe that creates a need for more orchestration and more metadata catalog type things, right? Because like all of a sudden, maybe you have BigQuery and you have Snowflake and you have Firebolt for your super hot, data sets, and you have, you have a bunch of BI tools because I don't know, they're easy to set up and different teams prefer different tools. So you end up with chaos in some ways. So you need to, to keep things somewhat constrained.
To spend on marketing, so you need to spend more on marketing to make things, to focus and then help people understand. And,
there's also, it's easy to set a lot of things up, but there's also things to that, a lot of information in the community. So there's a lot of knowledge sharing going on today. It's much easier to talk to colleagues who have tried things hands-on, and you know them in person, you trust them. So it's not like far out anymore. So it's very easy to get information and find somebody to really talk to.
It's easy to try the software too, right? Like you can just go and try it. But yeah, it's like the reverse problem is like maybe you end up with, a startup with 70 employees and like 500 SaaS tools. But here's the thing that's interesting, like talking the parallel between data engineering and software engineering. On the software engineering side, we accept that you need, multiple databases, multiple languages, multiple frameworks, multiple libraries. Like there's such diversity of systems, services, frameworks, libraries, languages, and it's well accepted, right? There's no one that says like, oh no, we should have like one language to rule them out, or there should only be the JVM. So there's probably still people that think that, but I think we accept that it's going to be a highly diverse, different solution for different people. A lot of microservices, right? We accepted that in software engineering. In data engineering, it's like, pick one data warehouse and stick to it. Pick one BI tool and stick to it.
Maybe it's like in software engineering, people accept that there's multiple ways to reach a great outcome, even though you chose a different path to get there. And with data, it's like, no, this is the perfect stack you should have chosen, and no any other whatsoever.
No, it's just licensing, guys. It's just licensing cycles. That's all. That's the whole difference. And people go and build, decide on a stack, and they need to close the license, and they negotiate, and everything takes time, and they close a yearly subscription or buy credits a year in advance, whatever. And they take the project to production, and they move on. Works, they move on. They add another project with a new tool because they like or think that tool is better, and they move on again. And so, and then but I think like. And it's a good and bad thing, right? On one hand, people have much more flexibility and options, and on the other hand, they can just pick another tool. They can pick another tech. So you constantly need to justify yourself. You constantly need to get better. And with Firebolt, for example, with consumption, it's even more, right? Like you constantly need to earn your customers' consumption. If they consume, it means they find you valuable. If they don't consume, you're not valuable. They're not using you. And it's very kind of, it's very out there. There's no way to hide it. There's no way to hide or postpone the contract.
Yeah, the trend seems to go in the direction of like things becoming more, or at least at larger or fast-growing organization, there's more pressure to like decentralize things and to democratize things. So every team can decide what tool they're going to pick and use. And then of course that creates, different set of problems. But if you want to move fast, like centralized structures like don't work as well, right? Because you need consensus, and consensus is expensive.
Business objects, the return of business objects, like retro release in Super VGA, business objects.
Yes, super VGA business objects, high resolution.
Exactly.
Now works with Macintosh, going back to the desktop products.
Old pricing. Yeah. So you get the retro $1 million license pricing as well. So a lot has changed since then.
Yeah, good. Max, this has been awesome. Being in the company of two data geeks and founders. I'm sure you guys we can keep talking for too long, but running out of time. So thank you, Max, so much. It's been super interesting. And good luck with everything at Preset, and we'll keep definitely watching out for what you do next.
We'll see you soon.
It's been super fun. There's a bunch of things we haven't talked about, so we got to solve a bunch for next time. But I learned a previous conversation with Eldad that he worked on early MDX compilers, which MDX is like multi-dimensional version.
Don't get him started.
So we should do a different show on that.
I wanted
to talk about data apps. I wanted to talk about what it takes in a database, what properties we need from a database engine for the next wave of like highly data-centric application, like those data apps. So there'll be material for another show. Maybe in a few months we connect back.
Absolutely.
Lots more.
Okay, Max. Thank you so much.
Thank you for hosting.
So we've launched just a few months ago. We're growing quite nicely, right? Yes. How many views do we have?
Very happy.
I think we've got we're in the thousands, right?
Happy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, not bad. But we want more. If you like this, help us spread the love. Yes. If you don't like that, spread,
vote for replacing me for someone else. That's fine.
And, we promise to try our best to keep bringing
You're amazing, Buzz.
The data people from the most interesting data companies. So subscribe, make our mama proud, help us out.
Love you, Mom.